Hello, good evening from Germany, and hello, a very good morning to you in California, my dear friends. We are in April of 2024, and we are talking about your heritage tours in the last year of 2023. Some time has passed, but I know that both of you enjoyed your time here in Germany. And I would like you to talk about your experiences here after I have some questions for you. My dear Gail, that
Yes,
was not the very first time you went to Germany, but it was your first heritage trip. Is that right?
that's correct. We had been to Germany a couple of other times, including one time to pick up a BMW, but this was my first heritage tour. And it won't be my last.
No, no, definitely not. Did you have anything that you expected, that you had a concrete idea it should be that way, or I have to see this, or this must happen? Did you have something like that?
I did not have a concrete expectation in mind because when I travel, I like to not have preconceived notions. I want to get there and see the place and experience the place for what it is. And that was very much the mindset that I brought to the
Mhm.
heritage tour.
Have you read something about, let's say, Ostfriesland, where we went? Did you read at least a little bit, or were you so courageous
I
not to read
read a
anything?
little bit. I read a little bit about the history. I was quite impressed that it had been such a peaceful area of Europe for such an extended period back
Mhm,
in the
mhm,
Middle Ages when
mhm,
everywhere else seemed to be at war constantly.
mhm,
And I read a little bit about the agriculture, but I didn't overdo it because I wanted to not have those preconceived notions. So I didn't want to
mhm,
like read everything there's ever written about Ostfriesland before I
mhm.
got there.
Mhm. And you, Gordon, that was definitely not your very first visit and not your very first, let's say, heritage tour. Did you overwork yourself? Did you overplanned or over whatever prepared it? Or what was your?
No, I would say not. I certainly did a fair amount of preparation. In
Hmm.
fact, I had a book for each of the two locations that I was visiting. I
Hmm.
wanted to be able to refer to actual documents
Hmm.
uh, or just general genealogical information that I might have. So
Hmm.
if someone had a question about my ancestors in a particular place, I could then answer that.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
I didn't go to an extreme because I knew that I was venturing into new territory and I couldn't really anticipate what I would find there.
Hmm. Hmm. And Gail, before we see your presentation, now some weeks are, passed by. What is your feeling? Is your visit very far away, or is it emotionally like yesterday? How would you
It
describe
is like
this coming
yesterday
visit?
because I'm constantly thinking back to it and reliving some of the moments that were so special there. And it's a part of Europe that feels, even though I'd never been there before, it feels somehow familiar to me.
Hmm.
And now
Hmm.
that I have been there, it really
Hmm.
feels familiar. And so, no, it
Hmm.
seems like we were only there last month, and this
Hmm.
was November of last year.
Hmm. And Gordon, the same question for you. Is it far away, this last meeting, or is it just another room you have to enter in your mind and you're there? How would you describe it?
It has receded a bit into the past for me,
Mm-hmm.
and it may be because we had different experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm looking more forward, I would say. I'm
Mm-hmm.
anticipating the possibility
Mm-hmm.
of research in Poland
Yep.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
with you or
Mm-hmm.
by
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
someone else.
Mm-hmm.
I had even considered coming back to make such a trip myself with you, but
Wonderful.
of
Mm-hmm.
course, travel expenses are what they are, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that would be
Mm-hmm.
reasonable or possible.
Well, we
But I
would.
think about it constantly. I would say that.
That's very interesting, what both of you have said. I would suggest, Gail, you might start your presentation and let us know
Okay.
about your experiences.
Let me share my screen.
Mm-hmm.
Take me just a moment, and I have to get rid of the bar at the top. I need the slideshow and from the beginning. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I call my presentation Adventures in Collaboration because that's really what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a privilege to collaborate with you and Gordon today in this presentation. It started when one of my local genealogical colleagues here recommended that I contact Gordon Seyffert. And so I did. That was the initial collaboration. And I exchanged emails with Gordon and scheduled him to do a presentation for our local genealogical society. And I'm a member of the Genealogical Society of Santa Cruz County in California, in the Central Coast region of the state of California. And Gordon presented in September and October of 2022 a two-part presentation about the German reference resources available at the Immigrant Genealogical Society in Burbank, where he is president of that society and also editor of their newsletter. And so that was the first formal collaboration. And here you can see Gordon and the two logos of the two societies. And Gordon, among other things, has taught himself to read various versions of the German script. And I decided after Gordon's presentation to make sure that I visited Southern California to research at the Immigrant Genealogical Society. And Gordon has said that he is proud to be a person who opens doors for other researchers. And I decided I wanted to walk through that open door. In February of 2023, I visited the Immigrant Genealogical Society and spent 2 intense days researching with Gordon's help. And we researched from many angles, almost more quickly than I could look at one resource. Gordon had pulled out another, and we reviewed books, pamphlets, and journal articles. We pored over maps to understand the geographic relationships, and we learned about Ostfriesian history and customs. Gordon helped me to translate the German in some of the documents I had brought with me. So I feel like this is the next collaboration. Gordon helped me to find my great-grandmother's baptism in the Leerhofe Ortsippenbücher, and he showed me how to work backwards through generations of Dirk's ancestors. I was so thrilled because I had known almost nothing about this line of my ancestry, and so I made great progress with Gordon's help. Anna Dirks was my maternal great-grandmother and the mother of my mom's father, and I had heard very little about Anna from my mother. My mother and her sisters were estranged from their father during my entire lifetime, so not only did I never get to know this grandfather, but I also lost the opportunity to learn about Anna Dirks. So finding my great-grandmother's name in the Leerhofe Parish Register fueled my hunger to learn more about her. She was born in 1870 at Münz, which is in Wittmund Kreis. She emigrated to the United States in March of 1873, and so obviously she was a very small child when she came to the United States. Later on, in 1889, she married John Gilson Miller at Morganville, Kansas, and she died in Gibbon, Nebraska in August of 1937. Anna departed from Hamburg on 7 March 1873, together with her widowed mother and several uncles and an aunt. She also traveled with her grandmother, Anna Müller, and Anna's second husband, who is named Johann Hanken. And as you see on the passenger list, Anna Louisa Dirks was actually listed as Louisa Hanken on the passenger list departing out of Hamburg. And they traveled from Hamburg to England and then took a different ship from Liverpool to New York. So they arrived in New York City on the City of Paris. That's the name of the ship, and you can see the image there on the screen. And they arrived on 24 March of 1873. Soon after arrival, Anna's mother, Teta Dirks, married a second husband, Ebe Omen Behrens, and Ebe's also from Ostfriesland. The family moved to Clay County, Kansas, and Anna grew up with her Behrens siblings, Minnie, Louis, and Emil. In this photo, which is dated about 1881, Anna is in the back on the left, and Emil had not been born yet. Anna Dirks married John Gilson Miller in 1889 in Morganville, Kansas, and they had 3 children, Theda Estella Miller, born in 1889, Margaret Luella Miller, born in 1891, and Ernest Edo Miller, born in 1892, and Ernest was my grandfather. Anna's daughter, Theda, trained as a school teacher, and she taught school in Kansas prior to her marriage to Howard Mercer in 1913. Theda and Howard moved to Gibbon, Nebraska, where they owned a farm. Theda and Howard had 2 children, Raymond Miller Mercer, born in 1915, and Margaret Louise Mercer, born in 1921. Anna's daughter, Margaret, known as Maggie, trained as a nurse, and she worked at that profession in Ellsworth County, Kansas. Margaret nursed a family back to health during the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918-1919, but she became ill herself and died of the Spanish flu in December of 1918. She was not married, and so she has no descendants. My grandfather, Anna's son Ernest, was a wheat farmer in Kansas. He married in 1914 to Kitty Stewart. Ernest and Kitty moved to California in 1919, and in California, Ernest worked as a cabinet maker. Ernest and Kitty Miller had 3 daughters. Ernestine, my mother, was born in 1917. Anna Alma was born in 1919, and Catherine Ruth was born in 2022. And these are 3 granddaughters of Anna Dirks. My family knew very little about Anna. My mother was only 2.5 years old when her father took them away from Kansas to California and away from Anna. Anna made 1 visit to California in about 1923, but my mother did not remember very much about her visit. But here you can see Anna marveling at orange trees, and you can see the palm trees in the background. So this is very different from Kansas, where she lived. Anna's life was rather beset by tragedy. Her father died 2 months before she was born. Her husband was a notorious philanderer, and Anna's second daughter died as a young woman. Her son Ernest moved far away to California. I was overwhelmed by the tragedies that Anna had endured, and I was saddened at knowing so little about her and her life. I was eager to bring Anna out of the shadows of neglect and into the light. In March 2023, Gordon Seyffert put me in touch with his good friend Dirk Weissleder, a well-known German genealogist. And as many of you probably know, Dirk is an expert not only on genealogy, but also heraldry and vexillology. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So we were off and running, and here is a brand new collaboration. Dirk helped me to arrange a week-long heritage tour to Ostfriesland, where my Anna Dirks and her family had lived. As a result of his own genealogical endeavors, Dirk has built a broad list of contacts. Before I had even arrived, Dirk got busy forging new contacts and connections, which proved to be essential points of collaboration during my November heritage tour. We arrived at Hanover Airport on November 7th, where we were greeted warmly by Dirk. And although Americans routinely drive long distances to visit other places, Dirk told me that the 3-hour drive from Hanover to Wittmann was a journey of epic proportions by German standards. And here you can see the route that we traveled. Both Hanover and Wittmann are in Lower Saxony, but the similarity ends there. The agrarian lifestyle in Wittmann is a world away from the bustling streets of Hanover. Ostfriesland is situated in the ancient realm of Frisia, a unique region that historically extended from the northern Netherlands along the North Sea to the region of Germany just below Denmark. I was struck by the combination of German elements, language, and food with Dutch elements, dikes, and windmills. I learned that my great-grandmother, Anna Dirks, had been born at Moens, and that the Dirks family had resided in Leerhofen parish for hundreds of years. Without even realizing it, my second great-grandmother, Tata Dirks, collaborated by helping me to determine where she had been born in Germany. Her obituary was very specific about her place of birth, which tells me that she made sure her children knew this information and could include it in her obituary. We arrived at Leerhofen, home parish of my Anna Dirks. And these are pictures that Dirk took in October when it was sunnier than it was in November when we were there. Dirk Weissleder facilitated our meeting with the pastor of the Leerhofen Lutheran Church and an interview with local journalists. The Evangelical Lutheran Church at Leerhofen has a separate bell tower, and the sound of the bells is absolutely glorious. It was thrilling to visit the Evangelical Lutheran Church at Leerhofen. The church is modest, but the interior is light and bright and lovely. The resonant tone of the bells when they ring is stunningly beautiful, and it was magical to hear those bells and to enter the humble church where Anna Dirks was baptized. This is the favorite photo that I took of my visit to the Leerhofen church. I knelt down so that I would see the image of the interior at about the same height that Anna would have seen it as a very young child, holding the hand of her mother, going to church. We visited Moens, where Anna Dirks was born, where Anna's mother, Tata Dirks, was born, where Tata's father, Lutken Dirks, was born, where generations of Dirks lived and died. Moens is so small, it doesn't have a main street or a village center. It is a collection of scattered houses spread so far apart that you often cannot see your neighbor's house. We visited the property where my Dirks ancestors had lived in Moens on the parcel of land that is now designated House 24. Although House 24 is only 120 years old and too modern to have sheltered my family, it was moving to know that my people had lived at that very place and perhaps looked on the same view of the expansive farm fields bordered by native trees that I saw. Ostfriesian genealogists with whom I collaborated at Orisch found a map that showed the layout of the land in Moens and determined precisely which farm had been in my Dirks family. And although the property is House 24 today, it was House 14 in Anna Dirks's time. And you can see it there marked in red. After asking permission from the current resident, I took photos of the fields behind House 24, assuming that the Dirks family must have farmed land immediately adjacent to the house. I soon learned that one should never make such assumptions. I learned that although my Dirks family had lived in Moens at the location of House 24, the fields they farmed were scattered about elsewhere in the area. It turns out that I should have been taking photos of the land across the street rather than the land behind the house. Unfortunately, I learned this information several days after having visited House 24. There is an old well on the property, which the current homeowner showed to us. It may be old enough to have been there during Anna's lifetime. As you can see, the current owner uses it as a planter. The farm fields in Moens are large rectangular plots bordered by narrow fences of native trees where they still grow field corn and potatoes. The land is uninterrupted by mountains or hills, and the sky is huge. There is a fresh scent of verdure and peaty soil. A couple of days later, we visited the Upstalboom Genealogy Society in Orisch. Orisch is a small city and the largest settled place in Wittmann Kreis. Thanks to Mr. Weissleder's preliminary visit some weeks earlier, we were warmly greeted by Upstalboom President Helmut Fischer, as well as a number of Upstalboom Society members. President Fischer presented me with a gift of both volumes of the Lehrhafe or Sippenbücher, and I am making good use of that as we speak. So this is where collaboration continues. The Upstalboom members helped me to find Moons and Lehrhafe on the large wall map, the two small villages that are important to my Dirk's family. Upstalboom researcher Beate Visser had done quite a lot of research on my behalf, and she patiently explained it all to me in English. This was a very valuable collaboration. I am really struck by the power of collaboration. The genealogists at Upstalboom helped me to locate maps, records, and ancestral properties. I learned of record categories that I had previously not known, and the fellow genealogists made a great effort to be helpful. I think face-to-face collaboration fosters the strongest bonds, and each person had found some piece of information or detail I had not known before, and each person spoke to me in English, which cannot have been easy for them. My day at Upstalboom convinced me of the power of collaboration, and I joined their society while I was there. Dirk helped me to not only visit Ostfriesland and learn about it, but to forge a two-nation connection. This feels like the very essence of collaboration. Everyone at Upstalboom communicated with me in English. Everyone with whom I collaborated had at least one relative who had emigrated to the United States. Several Upstalboom researchers had visited distant relatives in America. So I decided to join their society, and I look forward to ongoing collaboration with other Upstalboom members. I fell in love with Ostfriesland, its small towns and villages, the wide open fields, and the endless sky. I was charmed by Wittmann, the county seat, which is a small town. I felt the relaxed bucolic tempo of Lehrhafe, the home parish of my Dirk's family, which is a tiny village, and Moons, where my ancestors actually lived. I've been asked what German traditions survived in my Dirk's family after they arrived in America. Because I had never known much about this line of my family, I was not sure what, if any, German traditions might have survived. In my own small family, I'm the only child of my parents, and no German traditions were passed down. In speaking with my second cousins, who are the descendants of my grandfather's older sister, Theda, it appears that German traditions did not survive in that family either. The loss of German cultural traditions in America may have been exacerbated by anti-German sentiment in the United States during World Wars I and World War II. What apparently did survive was the family naming tradition. So we don't speak German, we don't have a file of Ostfriesian recipes, we weren't told about Ostfriesian history or folklore, and there's no record of a traditional music or dress in our families. One of the things that did survive was the farming tradition. Anna and her husband farmed at Morganville, Kansas, and up above you can see the way the farm fields look in Ostfriesland, and below you can see Valley View Farm, which was the farm where Anna lived with her husband in Kansas in the United States. Similarly, they both have wide open land. The thing that survived most was the tradition of reusing the names and saving the names. And these are the names that came down in our family. Anna Dirks lived her life as a farmer's wife. Her mother, Tata, was also a farmer's wife. Anna's stepfather, Johann Honken, was listed as a landsman on the Hamburg departure list. And John Honken was listed as a farmer in the U.S. Census records. Therefore, Anna Dirks's grandmother, Anna Müller, was also a farmer's wife. 3 Ostfriesian women who left their homeland in Germany and carried on in the New World doing what they knew best. My grandfather was a wheat farmer prior to relocating to California, and his sister Theda married a farmer, and Theda's descendants still farm today in Nebraska. What also survived was the passing down of names in our families. I have noticed the frequent continuation of some of the family given names. Anna herself carried a middle name of Diderica, which I believe refers to her father's name of Dietrich. Anna passed down the names of Teda, Margaret, and Edo to her own children. Anna's children continued passing down Dirk's family names, including Anna and Louise. And in my research, I've learned that giving children in later generations the same first or middle names carried by earlier generations of the family is an important element of Ostfriesland family naming practice, so that the names and the earlier family members who carried those names are not lost. And people asked, just as Dirk had asked today, what did you expect to find during your visit to Ostfriesland? I did not know what to find, but it was important to me to visit the place of my ancestors so that I might know in a visceral way where they began and how they lived. I think it is key to keep an open mind when visiting the birthplaces of our ancestors in order to absorb what is there without biases or preconceived notions. It was especially meaningful to me to meet the people of Ostfriesland, who were so welcoming. There is a magic in physically visiting an ancestral place, and these are some of the large, I don't know if they're houses or barns at Leerhofe. The magical moment for me was entering the church at Leerhofe and realizing that that is where generations of my family were baptized and married. It was very emotional for me to enter that church and realize generations of my family had been in that space. The resonance of the exquisite bells brought me to tears. Breathing the same air as Anna did, seeing the same rectangular fields, and losing myself in the immense sky. For a moment, I was able to experience with all my senses what my ancestors had also experienced. But there are questions beyond exploration. I wonder if my Anna had been able to return to her homeland and moons. Would the smell and the feel of the air have felt familiar, even though she was very young when she had left? Would she have recognized the warm interior of the Leerhofe church? Would she have known the sound of the church bells if she could have heard them again? While we were there, thanks to Dirk's preliminary work before we arrived, we met with journalist Larissa Siebold's, who is with Nordwest Mediengruppe, an online journal in Ostfriesland, and she prepared a comprehensive local interest article about my visit to Wittmund and the research into my Ostfriesian heritage. As a result, I am now corresponding with new contacts in Germany, people who read Larissa's article and reached out. And that is the beauty of collaboration. By learning more about Anna Dirks, her family, and her native land, I hope I have begun to bring Anna out of the shadows and into the light of respect, recognition, and memory. And I hope Anna knows she is not forgotten.
Well, Gail, thank you very, very much. This became, especially at the end, very emotional.
Yes,
And
I had trouble not tearing up at the end.
I do know how important that is for you. And I just quote, Anna is not forgotten. And I mean,
Yeah.
this is what is it all about. This is why we are doing genealogy.
Yes.
I would like to comment just a few things, what we saw in your presentation. First of all, you have learned what is the approaching of a person in Ostfriesland. How do you say hello to someone in Ostfriesland?
You say moin.
How do you approach someone by saying good morning?
Moin.
What about noon when you meet someone? What would be the,
Moin.
okay, in the afternoon
Moin.
and in the evening?
Moin.
Right. And why wouldn't you use the term moin moin?
You wouldn't.
That's
It's too
just too
much.
long. Too much.
And in my emails with my Ostfriesian contacts in ongoing collaboration, I want to particularly mention Gerda Thomas, who knows a person whose grandfather lived in house number 24
Mhm.
in the very early 20th century. And so she got some information for him about his experience living on that same piece of land.
Yeah. Oh,
And
wonderful.
in my email correspondence with my Ostfriesian friends, I always say Moin Gerda.
Fantastic, fantastic. Yeah, I mean, what you showed us is just a part of the whole trip.
Oh,
You were
yes.
focusing on Ostfriesland, but you have seen the countryside close to the North Sea. So there have been more places that you enjoyed. You figured out that Mons is very, very small. Perhaps small is too big, so to say.
Microscopic.
You have taken wonderful pictures, and you were showing about the situations that really touched your heart, especially when you arrived the church, and all of that. It was very interesting, and I thank you so much for your lovely descriptions of these parts of your trip, but also about your impressions. And I do think that this was not the last time you have seen the place, and
Oh, I hope not. I want to return.
if you just could do it, you would do it right away. So what you perhaps should tell everyone that we've been to America. How was that possible to be in America and Ostfriesland? What was that?
Well, you may have noticed in the photo in the newspaper article, I am standing next to a sign that says America, and there is a small place in Leerhofer Parish named America with a K, and there's a United States flag and everything. And Dirk and I had this great joke that my Dirks intended to move to America, but ended up in the United States instead.
Thank you very, very much to share your experiences with us. And I think everyone who can see this is touched by your experiences. And so thank you very, very much. And I would like to ask Gordon for his storytelling about his heritage tour to Germany in 2023 also. Gordon, the floor is yours.
I would want to comment on what we have just
Please do.
seen
Please do.
because I'm realizing, especially now, that what you get from a heritage tour depends upon what you bring to a heritage tour. And for me, it was different. First of all, I do not have a slideshow presentation with written comments and such to accompany the photos. I have photos in a slideshow by themselves, which you have seen and have now. But what I did when I returned was I prepared a 15-page little spiral-bound booklet, and one copy for each of my 3 children, because my family is small. Because I was going to a place where there were not many people with similar connections, I could not imagine that putting together a presentation on these places would have attracted viewers. So my interest was in preserving my thoughts about my trip for future generations. And I wanted that to be in paper because in the past I have prepared presentations. One time, this must have been 20, 25 years ago, I prepared a very interesting presentation on what I did not know on a part of my German ancestry because I thought I should make that apparent to members of the family. And I had this set to music. Everything was very well put together, I thought. And then everything changed with the operating systems, and I have essentially lost the ability to show what I had. I have it in print, but not in the original, what you might call a slideshow presentation. So I was hesitant. I only have my 3 children, and as of last month, my first grandchild. I will hope that there will be more grandchildren, but I am now of an age I cannot be sure that I will be around when they reach the time that they might become interested in genealogy. And so with that hovering dread of technological change that might destroy what I would create, I wanted to put what I had in writing. And so I have it. I mean, this is an unbound copy that I can show, and you can see the title, and it will keep the memories there for coming generations that might not even know me well. So that was one thing. The other part of my story is that there aren't that many connections to be made. My family has always been small. I found in going to Perleberg that the family was small back then, because when I went looking for one family that was present in the 18th century, I knew from the records of town citizenship and guild membership of 2 of my ancestors, father and son, who practiced the same trade, being cloth dyers. I knew that there were people there for most of that century, but what I did not know and what I discovered during this visit was that there weren't many more members of the family. There were only, for instance, 2 children born to that father, and that was because he died at such an early age. And then the son later, I think, died. I've forgotten now, but by 1800, they had left, and I don't know where they went. And so if I had living relatives, either here in America or there in Germany, who could tell me from their own knowledge, my research might have been more advanced, but I had to go in, you might say, cold and just accept what was there. And for the other side of my research, which was my father's side, the Seyffert family, I knew certain things. And the great takeaway from this visit was that I now have an even deeper understanding of my great-great-grandfather, who was the immigrant, who came to the central part of the United States in 1854. Back at the time of the International German Genealogy Conference in Sacramento, Dirk will remember this, I had attended a lecture that I thought, well, I'm having to do this as a favor because I was going to introduce the speaker, but it wasn't really a topic that I expected to have a great interest for me. But the lecture was by Fritz Jungling, who is an expert from Salt Lake City, talking about certain aspects of the German language and the German writings. And he talked at one point about the letter Y and how you might encounter 2 dots over this Y. And most people would say, well, that's an umlaut, but the umlaut is for 3 vowels and Y is not one of them.
Right.
So what are the 2 dots? And he said, well, it's a mark indicating for someone who might confuse the script Y with a G, that no, this is not a G, it's in fact a Y. And when I had seen my name written, and it's Seyffert, when I had seen it written in Saxony many times, there were those 2 dots over the Y. And all of a sudden, it came together in a dream the following evening. Early in the morning, I awoke, and everything had come together in my head. And I suddenly realized something about this great-great-grandfather of mine that I had not known. He had had 2 reasons for leaving Germany, not just one, but 2. And they were, in a sense, at cross purposes. The first was he was politically liberal. He had been in the revolution in Saxony in 1849, and it was apparent that things were not going his way, and so he thought that he could leave for America and maybe find the liberalism that he was seeking in the political realm. But at the same time, he was a guild member. He was a Drechsler. And he wanted to maintain his trade at a time when the Industrial Revolution was, as I now understand it, beginning to have its effect in Germany. And being so close to Leipzig, in his town, I think it must have been difficult. I think that he was in danger of losing his livelihood had he stayed there. And part of what he did was he moved to another larger city in Saxony before moving to America. I think that was his attempt to find a place where he might continue to thrive economically. And then after about 10 years, he left. And I think he was going with the hope that coming to St. Louis, which was his original destination, that was a boom town in the mid-1850s. I think he was expecting that, well, surely here I will be able to find something to do. And he had sent his son before him a year before. And the family, when it came over through an arduous journey, because they did not have the funds for the internal migration once they crossed the ocean, they finally get to St. Louis. And for a moment, both father and son had work. I think they were working in a chair factory. But then disease struck because the health conditions were not great in St. Louis. And when the son and the eldest daughter both died very precipitously, I can't remember if it was typhoid or typhus. There's a difference, and I never remember the distinction. But they were gone almost immediately, and now this family has to move to the middle of the state and become farmers. It must have been devastating. And so I remember my father telling me when I was about 10 or 12 years old that our name had not changed in America, that the name we had was the name we had had in Germany, and the spelling had not changed. And so I thought, well, this means it's the opposite of what you sometimes hear, the Ellis Island myth. Oh, my ancestors came to Ellis Island and they changed the name. Well, no, they didn't. The people changed their own name to fit in. But my father being very proud, that was presented in a way that I knew it was important, but he did not say why it's important. And it was left for me to try to figure it out. And so my genealogical journey has been to try to get back in my own mind to the time of my great-great-grandfather and to begin to understand him. And what this heritage tour did, and I probably should not go into depth about it, but what I learned was that my Seyffert family doesn't come originally from Saxony, but from Silesia, from Schlesien. And so in the East, and also in the Sudetenlands of today's Czech Republic, you can find instances of my name being spelled the way that I spell it today. But in Saxony, they speak a Saxon dialect. I'm sure it sounds much different than what they were used to northeast of the city of Görlitz. And so I think what my great-great-grandfather had done was he was trying to preserve the name. He was coming to America and he wanted to have the name not in the Saxon spelling and pronunciation, if it were different, but in the original as his family had known it. And so that is, I think, what was passed on to my father. The importance was, yes, we still had the same name, but it's much broader than what I had ever imagined. And so the Heritage Tour has given me that. And Dirk has also given me the means of understanding that that name might have a further importance, that it is not related, as the German name books will tell you, to the related or root name of Siegfried, but rather it's just the name, an occupational name for someone who makes soap. And we're now thinking that we could maybe begin to hypothesize a family history going back to soap makers someplace in those today non-German areas. And seeing a progression from that to a bathhouse operator, and from that to precursors of what we call surgeons today. And that those surgeons were, we found out, not educated in the university, but trained in some other manner. And Dirk believes, and I accept this, that it's probably military training. And he also thinks, you can't maybe tell, but I am almost 2 meters tall, which translates to over 6'6". And if I know I have my height from both sides of my family, from several strains in the family tree, but if the Seyfferts themselves were tall, and I believe they may have been, then it might have taken someone of a larger stature to be a military surgeon. Because when you think about it, and I go back to the American movie Dances with Wolves. I think it opens with a Civil War scene, and it's a horrific scene of soldiers in tents being attended by military physicians amputating limbs. And so if you're having your limbs amputated and you're at a time when anesthesia is probably whiskey and something to bite on, and then someone's probably having to hold you down while they're sawing off your arm or your leg. So this is a kind of a perspective that you can't get from books. You get this from going on such a tour and having your eyes opened to new possibilities, and then in your mind you create a new hypothesis that explains the origins of your family. And that's where I am. I was not going to one place, but two. The second place, relating to my mother's ancestors, was not as enlightening, but I still learned some things. There I had been fortunate before that Archeon had put the church books online about a month before I actually took my trip. So I was able to delve in and look very closely to see what members of the family I could find. What I can find is a lot of information about other members of this cloth dyer's trade, but there's not much on my family, and I was not able, from our contacts with the city archive, to uncover much more. And the closer contact with that particular town of Perleberg, it was the birthplace, the actual birthplace of my maternal great-grandfather. But he did not stay there long, moved with his family as a child or even an infant to a nearby town that I know a little bit more about. But they were briefly in Perleberg for such a short period of time that there just hasn't been anything apparently left in the local record. So one never knows what one's going to find. In my case, I came up empty on some of the things that I expected. I should mention before I close on this introduction that I went to the town in Saxony fully expecting that I would be able to hold and to read the church book entries and find, with Dirk and I both working at the same time, we would extract, I had lists of people that I had probable dates for certain events, life events, and I thought, well, this will go quickly. But we found that the church is so protective of their information because it's been a source of income for them that we were not permitted to do our own research. We had to work through a man who had some archival experience with the state. He would look at the book and tell us what he saw, and we could only ask him questions. And then, because we wanted to build a connection to him, to encourage friendship, not only for us, but for those who might follow us, we spent time talking about other things, his own life background, employment experiences and such. He was telling us about a person of my name of Seyffert who had lived in his house at some point. And so we were distracted. But I do not regret having taken this trip, and I look forward to more. And now I'll let Dirk ask me questions.
Well, thank you very much, Gordon. I start with the latest you said. You opened the dimension of working differently, not only with the sources, but also with your brain to think about things and to think what must have been the impression or, the emotion and whatever, what was, influencing the life of your ancestors. And that is a different dimension. So besides paperwork and without literature, this is a dimension that is very, very important, because when you have missing links or you have questions that actually there is no answer occurring on the horizon, you must find an answer. And yes, we are working with hypothesis, but still you need this to bridge different dimensions within a biography, and that is fantastic. And what Gordon said, I found him, I guess I can tell that I found him in a restaurant, or he found me in a restaurant in Sacramento, and he was telling me about his latest conclusions at night. And that was also touching for me, because I do the same. I live through the individuals I research on. And so there is a wonderful saying by the Historic Society of Berlin. They have the motto, if you research it, you have lived through it. And this is exactly what Gordon was talking about.
I was struck by how important names are for both of our
Exactly. That was
tours.
the next thing I would jump on. I mean, Gail, you have learned that the name system in Ostfriesland could be tricky, could be very difficult, and so we are blessed by having names that remained from some part of the history. If not, that would be nearly impossible. And I need to quote something that I learned today. It is a Japanese saying, and I will translate that, and it should be like, man's life is short and name lives eternally. And I was so touched. That was said in the German parliament today. because we had some new laws on family names, and I needed to share this with you. So a man's life is short and name lives eternally. So, and Gordon, what you said with the two dots, I mean, it is not just something, it is really a special aspect.
Yeah.
And what I really liked, and perhaps we can show this little film that you have prepared. Is that okay now?
Yes.
That you said that you were well prepared, but also open to see the place of your ancestors. So that you had really both together. On the one hand, you have been prepared, but on the other hand, you were not that fixed by saying, "Oh, I just look in one direction." No, the preparation meant you are totally free and take in and absorb everything that you could see. I'm going to share now this little film with you. Can you see it? Yes, you can.
Yes.
Okay.
And this is the place that we first visited. Now we're in the Saxon location. That's a copy, a photocopy of church books as I would have been holding them. This is within the church itself. Here we are having an ice, and you see how modern the town is. This is me studying to see what I have found. This is a Seyffert document found in the archive. You can't see it much, but in the center of the page was another Seyffert name. This is the place in Schlesien, that I'm speaking of, Rauscha. So my people were here at least in 1777 and had left by the turn of a century. Are we advancing? There we are. This is me in Dirk's library looking at all kinds of things. Here is a church in Dresden, the Frauenkirche, and there's many stories to be given if we had the time to pause. This is the wealth of Saxony. Here we are. We can see the dome of that church in the background, and we're enjoying a little inexpensive meal in our own hotel room. Here I am catching up on the news, finding that the tourism has been killed off by the poor weather.
And here, the Sächsische Zeitung, yeah, the Saxon newspaper.
Yes. This is the military museum, and I got a lot from this. There's not enough time in this brief interview to be talking about everything, but that is one of the two items they had about the revolution in Saxony. These are photos from Iraq, and it's an American field hospital, and you can see the gruesome images. That is the kind of thing that my military surgeon ancestors probably had to deal with. It really gives one pause on two levels. First, as an American citizen today, and then as someone who is perhaps descended from medical workers of centuries back. Here we are in Berlin. This is my disappointment of not being able to actually meet the woman who was the town archivist. That's too much to explain. This is a vision of a street in Perleberg. Here I am actually working with the guild records, which was a surprise. I was able to handle those. And the next slide will show you an image containing my ancestor's name. It's that Johann Joachim Gedeke, aus Perleberg. It's the first line of the second paragraph. They're very proud of their town. It's the pearl of the region.
The central station.
Yes, this shows the remoteness of some of the places that I was visiting. You have to work to get to these places.
Right. Yeah, thank you very much for well, putting all that together in a small film. Very, very nice. Yeah, and Gordon, we must be honest. We were sleeping in the train sometime, and it was
Yes.
very, and I found you in our kitchen in our apartment working all night. And you have seen some shots that I showed that were shown here. So my dear friend and colleague Gordon was working all the time, and it was not only because of a jet lag, he was really busy. So
He was working for me when I visited the Immigrant Genealogy Society library. He opened up the library on days it is not normally open, and we researched 2 full days, and then I exhausted went to bed, and he worked half the night putting together a bunch of work to
That's
augment what we had done during the day. And I woke up in the morning to all these new pages of information. So Gordon,
we know him.
big
We
shout
know
out.
him. You know,
Well, and I must say, I don't know about you, Gail, but part of the experience of the Heritage Tour for me was taking those hours from the night and recording in my
Yeah.
journal what had happened. And
Right.
again, it was with the thought that someday my booklet, which I was carrying with me everywhere, with the journal entries day by day, would be a greater insight than just this 15-page booklet for my grandchildren or great grandchildren so that they could see what I was doing. And my ultimate motive with that is I want them to be curious enough that they begin their own research.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
not just my mental travel,
well,
it's
Gordon,
theirs to come.
Gordon, you know that when I'm in the United States, I also take down notes everywhere and at any time as possible because the impressions are so detailed. I have a question for both of you. Gail, do you think you have come to Germany as a tourist? Did you have the
No,
idea you're just coming as a tourist, or
no,
what was-
not at all. I felt like I was coming to Germany as someone who has a connection to Germany and wants to dig deeper into that connection.
And you never
All-
felt that someone reacted to you as you are just a tourist? That was not
No,
your.
no one reacted to me that way, and I didn't feel like I was there as a tourist, even though that wonderful day we spent at the North Sea was
Mhm.
definitely a tourist type
Yeah.
experience because my personal family ties were
Mhm.
farther inland. But so going not as a tourist did not prevent me from enjoying parts of Germany as a tourist.
But you remember when we were starting so early in Hanover and arrived for the right time for having a cup of coffee in the
Yes.
bakery. You remember, and you were the
Oh, yes.
stars.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. We had coffee and hot chocolate and pastries everywhere.
Exactly.
And for me, that is part of the delightful experience of traveling in general is experiencing what is there and enjoying it.
Gordon, did you ever had the impression you might come as a tourist?
At the very beginning of my slideshow, you saw two slides. One was from a hilltop overlooking a town. In the background was the Kiefhäuser. And this was Berge bei Kelbra, which is just within the border of Sachsen-Anhalt today. And it was a place where an ancestor of mine left late in the 18th century. He enlisted in the Saxon army. And he ultimately ended up in my town of Saxony that I visited. And I wondered, since I had these two towns, Sveinkau and Berga, I wondered what the difference might be. And I wondered if I might get any indication of why he left. And I went there, Dirk, as you know, with your wife and two children as
Yep.
my escorts.
Yep.
And we were, in fact, tourists in that one little
Yeah.
town
Yeah. Yeah.
because we knew no one and we couldn't find our way around. There didn't appear to be a town center. We had a difficult time finding our way to the church, which was up on the hill. And when we did find our way, it was only by single lane cobblestone streets. And as we reached the church and started to walk around, your wife told me that she had the impression that people were watching us from their windows. Did not see a single person on the street anywhere in that town. And I got a definite impression of why my ancestor left. It was he would have wanted to see the world and to get away from this place with its dark, gloomy atmosphere. The church itself, you saw the picture of the church. It's dark, it's gray, it's gloomy. We're not able to enter it because it's Protestant, so it's locked.
Yeah, that's right.
All we could do was walk around. There was no graveyard attached to it. It's someplace else. We did not know where. So I was definitely a tourist for that time.
Well, and I have to circle back to this question too, Dirk, because our 2 days in Hamburg were a little bit more of a tourist excursion and less of a genealogical excursion. Ballenstadt sort of bridged between a genealogical experience and a tourist experience because Ballenstadt came some years after my ancestors actually left by way of the port of Hamburg, but it did do an excellent job of illustrating the immigrant circumstances in general. And it was just wonderful to spend those 2 days in such a vibrant, large city. And it was also extremely special, thanks to you, Dirk, to be able to meet the Gunnar and, I forget the name of the gentleman who's the chair of the state archives at Hamburg.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting to find out about some of the different categories of records that they have there and get the behind the scenes tour. And so that day was, both those days were, well, not only rainy, but rather touristic, but in a totally good way. I really feel like I got to experience a lot of Hamburg in a sort of a whirlwind way. And that was also really special to just kind of end the week on a high note.
Yeah, thank you very much. You gave the word of rainy. Yeah, I was it was terrible weather, to be honest. And I always describe this as typical German weather. The name was
And we were just too early for the Christmas markets. They were just setting up.
But the name of the gentleman was Bollmann, Ulf Bollmann.
Yes, Herr Bollmann.
And
Thank you.
that was the other extreme. You said there were, you were feeling yourself being a tourist. On the other hand, it was extremely private in being backstage of the Start Archive, and things were shown and described and all of that.
And those experiences really do bridge the sort of different ways to visit an ancestral land where you have a genealogical aspect to seeing a place.
Gail, you were talking about the people's ability to speak English. Gordon, we saw the difference, right?
Yes.
Why is it? Why is it? How would you, in your trip we had together, what is the difference in
the
experience
difference
that Gail was
we
talking
were
about?
in the former East Germany
Yeah.
for the whole of the heritage tour.
Mm,
Yeah.
So we were in Brandenburg, we were in Sachsen-Anhalt, we were in Sachsen.
yeah.
Uh, it
Mm,
it makes a difference because those people had so many decades of a different experience.
mm,
And certainly when they were in school, they were learning Russian, not English.
mhm. And Gordon,
And
mhm,
go
go.
ahead.
Well, and Gordon, you agreed it is not only to have an interpreter by language, but it is also an interpretation, or let's say can I say a moderator actually, a person who moderates between the Germans under themselves, right? So it's
Yes.
not only the language, but it's also the mentality thing. You cannot just arrive as an American film star and then say, well, here I am. Well, even the people on Ostfriesland would be laid back a little bit. Yeah. So, it is what I want to say is it is not only the language, it is also, you need to have someone who gives you the idea how the people's impression might be, and what fits and what does not fit. I just can say that I took a break and were just watching Gates dealing with the colleagues over there in the library. And once she said "moin" to someone entering newly the room, she was just in it. Yeah, because everyone knows she understood. And, as we say, you had the same smelling of everyone in the room, right? You belong to that group, you belong to that tribe. And that is so important. So when someone watches our conversation, it is important to know, yes, there are areas in Germany where you nearly have no problem with any English. But on the other hand, it is very important when you go to smaller cities in the east that might be difficult.
Dirk, I would point out here one of the slides that we showed was me sitting opposite the gentleman who was appointed by the church in my town to
Mhm,
read the church books for us.
mhm,
And we went through that slide so quickly, but you might have noticed that I was wearing a dark business-like jacket,
mhm,
a standard blue
yeah,
shirt,
mhm,
and
mhm,
I had on white gloves and I was using a pencil.
mhm.
And by all of that, I was showing my respect for what I was seeing.
Exactly.
The
Yeah.
gentleman opposite me was in a work shirt,
Mhm,
had
mhm, mhm,
suspenders. He was
mhm,
very relaxed. He had no reason to try to make an impression on us, but I
mhm.
was very much trying to make an impression on him,
Yeah.
not only for myself, but for,
Mhm,
as I said earlier, those who might follow.
mhm.
I
And
wanted them not to have a bad experience with this American coming with a former West German.
and there there's another difference. I went to Ostfriesland before actually Gay came, so I knew the people, and that is also very important that they have seen your nose before and that they know you are coming. And Gail, we were in time, but they have been also in time, right? It was 9 o'clock. They were there. We've been there, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And that also is what Gordon says is a kind of showing respect, right?
Showing respect. Well, and thanks to Gordon's advice about that, when I showed up at Oopstalboom,
Mhm,
I brought pencils
mhm,
and not pens,
mhm.
and I well, I had to wear my raincoat, of course. tried to tried to not wear blue jeans, you know.
But people tend to evaluate the first look, but on the other hand, I guess that on the long run, you have seen nearly everyone was very nice. Gordon, you remember when we had this quite long trip to the archive of Leipzig, and it wasn't what we expected. But weeks later, you said, well, perhaps there is something in it. You never know. So it was good to take some pictures. Yeah,
Yes.
to take down everything. So even I want to point this out. I want to point this out. To deal with frustration is very, very important. Don't expect too much. Just be open with all your senses you have and just see the place, feel, and imagine what could have been. And don't
And I
get
I was thrilled when we went to the state archives of the Free and Hanseatic city of Hamburg.
Mhm.
While there was nothing there regarding my Dirks, you
Mhm.
found a Weissleder or two. So
The, the,
oh,
the,
there's
the
there's
same at
the
the
silver
I'm,
lining.
I'm so sorry, Gail. It was the same when we visit the library. But I'm looking after those.
Well, of course, you're there.
But summing it all up, my impression was that even when the trip ended, you could have imagined to stay longer. Is that
Oh
right?
yes, oh yes,
Gordon, of course.
absolutely.
And I hope that with this heritage tour, um, I hope that you also felt it wasn't my heritage, but I was part of the tour, and I
Yes.
really could take part in your emotional dimension. And we tried
And I got so much out of it, so much more out of it with your help, Dirk, than I ever would have on my own. I just want to say that because it just made it such a rich experience. And not just that you paved the way, but you were able to explain things as we went along
Mm.
every step of the way, things that I would have not have noticed or realized on my own.
Thank you very much that you say that, but do not underestimate our humor. We were laughing. We were laughing, and that's
Humor,
the same with Gordon, right? It is so
humor
because
when traveling is essential.
yeah, it makes it so much lighter. Yeah, when you, oh my gosh, we missed the train or we missed the bus or whatever. It is raining again. Yeah, but okay, that's the way it is, right?
That's the way it is,
Yeah.
right?
One
Um,
more thing I would like to say.
mhm,
This is not, of course, my first visit to Germany, and I can remember coming to Germany on a business trip in 1990.
mhm,
So this was just the year after the fall of the wall.
Yes, right.
And I knew I was going to be in Berlin and would have an opportunity to visit libraries. But I had, at that time, no familiarity with German script. Uh, just the Fraktur of the older books would have been somewhat difficult for me to handle. And I certainly knew by instinct that I did not know how German libraries were organized.
mhm,
So I was back then, as now, preparing for my later visit in the same trip. I found myself with an opportunity to visit the library in München-Gladbach. And this is a fairly small library. I knew no German, so I walked in, I merely nodded to the person at the desk and headed for the card catalog, which was like the card catalogs we grew up with, Gail. The wooden
Yes.
drawers that you pull out, and there are index cards that are held by a steel rod in place. And I started examining how do they organize things. If I want to look at history, where do I find that? So I had a dictionary. I look up the German word for history and then look for that in the card catalog. And then I'm looking within that section to see how the subsection is organized. And I'm making notes. So by the time I got to Berlin, I was able at least to understand where I should be looking in this huge card catalog in West
wonderful.
Berlin
Yes, yes,
to
yes.
find
That's
things that
brilliant.
may be of interest to me.
Mhm, mhm.
Start
That's
small
brilliant.
and then expand.
Definitely. My dear friends, let me perhaps close this here by having a last question. Gail, where does your next trip in Germany lead you to?
Oh, that's a question I haven't thought about yet because I want to go back to Ostfriesland. But I
Okay.
have German ancestors from several different eras who
Mhm.
settled in different parts of the United States. I have really quite a lot of German ancestors. And before I go back to Germany, I'm going to have to go back to the Immigrant Genealogical Society and explore some of those lines just to know where to start.
You heard me saying the quote of Susan Sontag. I haven't been everywhere, but it's on my list.
Yeah, it's on my list.
Gordon, same question for you. Where's your next trip in Germany headed?
Okay, I'm taking you literally here because I just realized the other day as I was working with DNA results,
Mm-hmm.
if I've taken the big Y DNA test,
Mm-hmm.
I have not taken the mitochondrial DNA because it doesn't really offer me anything. But if I'm traveling both routes of my family tree, the paternal, 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 maternal, maternal, maternal,
Mm-hmm.
both of them take me back as far as I can go to present day Poland,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is kind of interesting.
Is it Silesia then, the second part, or where is it in Poland today?
Yes,
Both
yes,
Silesia.
that's the one, and the other one is Ostpreußen,
Oh.
Ostpreußen, excuse
Mm-hmm.
me for the
Mm-hmm.
pronunciation.
Yeah.
And so if you ask where I would go in Germany, you may recall that as I was looking at your library,
Yeah.
the Society Library, in the sale books, I found a book that related to my wife's ancestry, not from Niedersachsen, but from
Yeah.
Saarland.
Yeah.
And it had a chapter of 25 pages
Yeah.
giving
Wow.
a thorough description of her ancestor who lived in the mid 18th century
Mm-hmm.
in Saarland. And now, if I had to pick a place that I would go to Saarland because I know so much about the place, especially
Okay.
the villages from which her ancestors came,
Okay.
that's another place I would want to see in person.
Okay, I understand. My dear friends and colleagues, I understand. We are expanding.
Yes.
Just
Now that I have a
welcome.
grandchild,
Mhm.
that grandchild needs to know about that ancestry as well. My
Definitely,
German horizon continues to expand.
Right.
definitely. And it is such a wonderful motivation. And it is just
Yes.
wonderful that Gordon brought us together.
Yes.
And I must tell the little story that in the 1990s, I wrote a letter to IGS asking for help for my own research. And Gordon just found this letter, well, now just a few years ago. And I always wanted to see the place. And I have never, ever imagined that the president of that society is my fatherly friend. So just wonderful. You became such a strong friend, both of you, to not only myself, but to my family. And I hope that also you understand this as a heritage tour, not in the sense of genealogical connection, but also in the connection to my country, as I understand the connection in the other way, because you are just wonderful representatives of your country. And so
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dirk.
let me end here because we could have hours and days
Yes,
and
we
weeks.
could.
There is a saying you should stop when it comes to the best. We have reached the best. Thank you so much for sharing your impression and your experiences with us. And please understand that our doors are open always. You're welcome, and that we admire your expertise and your friendship. And
And
thank you.
doors are open here as well.
Yes.
And I let the collaboration continue.
Thank you very much, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Yes.